In this episode, Marizaan challenges me to explain how to do interactional pattern analysis. The IPA involves a series of steps. Once you complete these steps, you'll be doing your first IPA. Welcome to episode 23, the final episode of our series, The Art of Therapy, Season 2.
It's exciting to be here. I can't believe in Series 2, Episode 23 of The Art of Therapy.
It's amazing. When we began in Season 1, it was just a couple of episodes. Then it was Season 2, and suddenly here we are at 23
Yes.
episodes. It's amazing.
And it really has been a journey.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's as if it just sort of unfolds. The more we talk about and explore psychotherapy, the more there is to learn, the more there is to see.
Exactly, yes. You just can go on and on. Yes. So take a step back. So just looking at our last episode, so we really just explored how our traditional diagnosis with the DSM, and looking at the interactional pattern analysis, and how that it's a relational diagnosis, and how they just add to a therapist's repertoire, and just creating even a broader picture for therapists to understand, to work in, and to help as well.
Yes, that's it.
So very exciting.
Yes.
So we also said we're really going to go to the how-to. So if we can have a look at that, and really understanding the how-to of the IPA.
Yes, of course, we're back to the how. So let's just look at it really practically, because in doing an IPA, one really needs to understand the specifics, the steps, yeah? So let's assume it's someone is coming for individual therapy and has a particular difficulty or problem. We'll begin with that. The way that one will do an IPA is, first of all, have a first session with the client. It's going to be a person-centered session. And the first objective of that session, or the first one objective of that first session, given that it's person-centered, is really to create that therapeutic relationship, that milieu, that safety, where through the congruence, the deep understanding and accurate understanding, empathy, and the acceptance, unconditional positive regard, a client can begin to be more of who they are, express fully and in a safe way something they're struggling with. And being within that therapeutic relationship is already enabling them to get relief and have a corrective emotional experience, begin to feel differently, or begin to understand themselves in some way. And it's just a first session. So the first objective of this approach, the IPA, is a therapeutic benefit, just immediate relief. But it doesn't end there. The second objective to this person-centered interview is for diagnostic purposes, because again, it's one thing to deeply understand another, but as we've been exploring, it's also important to be able to step back, have a perspective, and help them understand what may be contributing to their difficulty, and therefore guide them in a safe, meaningful process. And that requires being able to identify the problem and then look causally as what's causing that. So that's diagnosis. And to then explore a series of possible solutions. So the second part here is for diagnostic purposes, in effect to arrive at relational diagnosis, a relational view, a interactional view of their possible difficulty. So it'll be this first session, which is person-centered, and very often the session will be recorded, an audio recording, because it's less intrusive often than a video recording, of course with the client's permission. And that's really helpful for the therapist after the session, because there's so much that happens in the session. and to try to be aware of it in real time, in the here and now, can be very difficult. So having that audio recording can be such a help when the therapist goes back and listens to that session.
I think that's just I think the recording part, it's actually so important just to note that, because just from experience and from the training that we worked at, it's hard to remember all of these things and to go through. But if you record it, you can really be there fully, and then afterwards go and look at it and work through it.
Yeah, we explored this in training, and I'm glad you've shared it, because it's so real that it's a lot to learn. And when you've got an audio recording, you know you can go back to it. So it means you can be really fully present with your client, be deeply person-centered, and know that you'll be able to afterwards step back, listen to that recording, and be able to note what was really key about the way in which they communicated, possible impacts. So that really is optimal.
It really helps a lot.
Yes.
Yes.
So once that session is recorded, the next consideration is during that session, the therapist is going to be very, very attentive to the client's presenting problem. We've looked at, in our journey, that the presenting problem or the presenting complaint serves as the context, the flashlight for understanding where to look, what to look at. And so that presenting complaint is carefully considered. And then the therapist, as they are busy with and relating in a deeply person-centered way, they, of course, are a participant observer in their interaction with the client. And they're going to note any nuances to the client's communication, their behavior, possible impacts, both therapeutically that the therapist may consider relates to the client's presenting problem. So that's happening in real time, in the here and now. And the therapist is going to listen very carefully to how the client is talking about their system and their relationships that they're in, and listening very carefully to how that's expressed, what's happening there. And on that base, I think we've noted before, it's a bit like, how do you make sense of what kind of animals have been through a particular territory? A tracker cannot have direct observation of the animal, whatever that is. But if they look at that, that paw print, that particular print, they can work out what kind of animal has been there and been in interacting in that environment. So in a similar way, the therapist will listen very, very carefully to how the relationship's being spoken about. What's the experience of the client in their primary system, in their relationships? And from this, the therapist is then going to start examining what are the interactions that are occurring in the client's relationships. So what's occurring in the therapeutic relationship and has bearing possibly on their difficulty without their awareness, and what's happening in their system around the interaction that may explain their difficulty. And so again, just going back to it, in that first session, that's a lot to do. So a lot of the time, that first session is going to be really just purely person-centered, very non-directive for the majority of the interview. And then the last 20 minutes or last 10 minutes, more conventional, classic directive questions around any information that's needed. But amazingly, we often don't need to ask as many questions as we think, because when we learn a person-centered approach and we deeply person-centered and understanding the experience of another, they very often just share and talk about everything that's relevant. And so by the later part of that first session, they've created context for everything that's relevant. And one often just only needs a few additional questions, but very often it's already there.
Hi, it's Marizaan, and I would like to tell you something extraordinary happening at Treatment Works. So if you are a healthcare professional and you would really like to deepen your therapeutic skills, training with Dr. Phipps is a must. In my experience, his training is so compassionate, it has high clinical excellence, and it makes therapy so clear. Training is also not just a space to learn, but it's also a space to connect, to share with others and learn from others. So if you are ready to deepen your therapeutic skills and to look at more ways to support your client, join us for training at Treatment Works. You're welcome to visit our website at treatmentworks.co.za.
You can actually learn so much from someone from a person-centered approach,
Yes.
and hearing them and being there with them.
Yes, we've spoken about as you really listen to them and actively listen, and then any open-ended question, it's remarkable what stepping into the client's world means and what they share. So as the therapist gets to the later part of that first session, they may ask some additional questions, some closed to the extent that they're open-ended, will provide at times even more meaningful information, but some closed-ended. And then we'll generally conclude, remember there's already been a therapeutic benefit from a deeply person-centered approach, but the therapist will then move and just very gently or just generally look at a possible way forward, some kind of guidance, some kind of direction about what's indicated, and one that where if it's done really well, the client already has felt that relief and beginnings to feel hopeful about the way forward, encouraged and empowered. And that would make up the first session. And after that session, the therapist will now go back and listen to that audio recording and will now again carefully document the presenting complaint and then notice the context. What did the client share? What emerged about the context for their difficulty and the main relationships? And after that, the therapist will consider each of the interpersonal variables we spoke about. So they would consider, okay, what was the definition of the relationship? Was it a complementary, leading or following? Was it a parallel, mutual leading and following, turn taking? Or was it a symmetrical one where neither one is following and both are leading, often associated with conflict? So therapist will take that first variable and describe that interaction that's happening in the therapeutic relationship and in relevant relationships of the client's primary system that relates to their difficulty. Having done that, the therapist will then think about the next variable. And so they'll begin to just look at what was the clarity of the client's communication and how does their communication style link possibly to the presenting complaint, and what's the nature of their communication, what communication do they receive in their primary system. Then the therapist will start looking at emotional distance. We explored that emotional distance, being close or far, is just so important to the way in which we relate and bears greatly on mental emotional well-being. So that could relate to their presenting difficulty. Then the therapist will start looking at their congruence and authenticity in how they relate, and how those are relating to them. Then begin to look at empathy and accurate understanding, and then also looking at the degree of judgment or lack of judgment, so unconditional positive regard that they both express or receive. And that's already deeply meaningful. Then the therapist will start looking out for, we spoke about confirmation. To what extent is a client being validated or not? To how do they validate and confirm? And does that relate to their presenting difficulty? Then the next one is, how do they express their needs? We know that's such an important part of self-actualization, as is the need for confirmation, to know that I matter, that I make a difference in this world, that I'm valued. And having looked at that, then one's going to start taking it further. We then explored does someone understand circular causality? Do they punctuate or define the problem more in terms of a linear way, straight line way, I'm causing it or you causing it, or are they able to see circularity? And that's a remarkable thing. Then one will also consider metacommunication. Are they tending to communicate about their communication? How does this happen in their primary system? That's an amazing thing to see. And then we'll also explore, the therapist will look at what's their capacity as a skill, their problem-solving skill. And does that in any way bear on the presenting problem? And then having looked at that, they will then look at another aspect of interaction. We spoke about control. That's a key aspect. Is it a very strong control? Is it perhaps excessive? Is it very low control, possibly associated with difficulties around assertiveness? So they'll note that quality of the interaction. And then they will look towards the quality of the interaction that has to do with flexibility. Is a client flexible? What's the flexibility of the system they're in? What kind of learning is there? And then what kind of capacity or potential is there for either eliciting acceptance? We've explored how important is this? Or alternatively, are they eliciting rejection without meaning to? And does that relate to the presenting problem? So having explored this just like remarkable continuum of communication and interaction and these beautiful patterns, then the therapist will look at how does all of this connect to the presenting problem? How can one explain it logically, both in terms of how they're relating in the session and in terms of what one is learning, the therapist learning about their primary system. And once that is done, that shows a very, very clear picture of what it is about their relating, their interaction, that could be contributing or causing or maintaining their level of difficulty and their expressed difficulty, and looking at that interactionally in the here and now.
Sure. I think that is just so exciting to actually go through all of it and to really look at how to do the IPA. And it really is a mouthful. And it's on the one hand, it's so empowering because it makes it so tangible, and you can work with it, understand it, and help with those different variables.
Yes.
But it's also very complex.
Yes, it is. There's so much to learn and take in. The moment you begin to explore another dimension and, almost another world,
Yes.
once you begin to see process, once you begin to see interaction and patterns of interaction, it's exquisite, it's exciting, and there's so much to learn. You learn about this nuance, then that nuance, and how does it connect here? And so it's a lot to learn. And the more that one sees, the easier it gets. But yes, there is a lot to learn. There's so much that's possible. So yes, once a therapist has got some basics, and you can't see this all, and even when one listens to that recording and goes through it, it would be difficult to just note every single nuance here of interaction. But as you practice this, you begin to see, emotional distance seems to be very closely related to this presenting difficulty. And so that it's like a puzzle that you begin to make sense of. But just setting out the IPA as a procedure, the next step then, having looked at how does their interaction within their system, within the therapeutic relation, relate to the presenting problem, and having noted that, then one will look at, well, what's the aim for the therapeutic process? And the aim here is to assist the client with making the smallest change that will result in the biggest change and the biggest relief within themselves, within their relationship. So it's known as the nodal point. So what would that smallest possible change be to affect the biggest possible change? So that's really what one's looking at in terms of the objective or the aims. And then the final step is to look at, well, okay, how are we going to do this? What is the treatment approach? What theoretical orientation will the therapist use? And that's the beauty of the IPA that you noted before, that it's integrative. And so therapists can utilize any known therapeutic approach, any approach or theoretical orientation that's going to assist in achieving these objectives and helping the client. So that's an incredibly creative process and a very exciting one.
It's really exciting, and there's so much meaning in it.
Yes.
And a lot of my experience is just there's so much empowerment in understanding this and working through it, and having that option of using any therapeutic approach that would actually help the client in it, but almost on a having a different frame, having a wider view of the client, and then seeing what will help and what will assist.
Yes, that's the beauty. It's thrilling because you have a different frame of reference. One can draw on a more conventional one, the DSM, and we've explored that. And at the same time, there's a whole other frame of reference upon which to understand the client and what they're experiencing in the here and now. That's really practical, very, very systematic. So it makes therapy not just exciting, but very pragmatic, and understanding why we do what we do, or why one is taking that next step, and being able to draw on any known therapeutic approach or theoretical orientation. I mean, wow.
It is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, it just makes me think we've covered so much in this season of looking at and understanding the IPA, and it just takes me back to when I got exposure to the IPA, and my sense is just that it makes so much sense, and then you work with it, and you go, oh, what? But I think what really helped me is just the continuous training on it, and going for training on training, and every time you do, it just makes more and more sense.
Yes.
And it just builds your framework more and more. So I think with that, I think there's so much more that we can talk about, and so much more to explore, and maybe looking a bit more at the practical side of it, really looking at doing it practically and really going through that.
Yes. Yeah, I think what you said is just key. It really is like you've got it, and then suddenly what to do. So you can't learn psychotherapy really from a book. You don't learn it from a PowerPoint presentation. Psychotherapy is experiential. You need to see it. You need to try it. You need feedback in a safe way. So that's where training can really help. So I think if anyone really if they want to take it further, joining us for some of our training, which is, I think, is really meaningful and a safe way of exploring this. Wow. That can really help. And then I think as we go on, and we can explore this in next season, yes, looking at it very practically, we can look at case studies, and of course those are going to be composite or made up, but really looking and exploring this very practically. For those who can't join us here in person for training, I think that would be valuable.
I go with that. I think it will be extremely valuable, and I must say I can look forward to the next training and really exploring that further. But then also to our next, to just continuing with this and discussing the art of therapy even further.
Yes, I share this. Yeah.
Until next time.
Yes.
Thank you for walking this journey with us on the second season of The Art of Therapy. We hope that this season have gave you a glimpse into or have helped you consolidate your understanding of the interactional pattern analysis. We are looking forward to continue this journey on the third season of The Art of Therapy.